The next type of state we're going to talk about is probably one that is less familiar to you than query params and less familiar to you than using Ember data in the standard way, and it is draft state. So the thing I want to sink in is that draft state is locally stored, meaning it's in JavaScript memory. Sometimes it's in local storage, right? So you can actually survive a refresh. It eventually will be persisted. And a third component here is like it's usually best applied to something that requires a lot of user time or effort, or sometimes even luck and creativity, right? So imagine maybe you have like a game where you can just, spin something and like you get a randomly generated picture, and if the user like doesn't want to lose that, and if they try again, they'll be less lucky. Like you might want to hold on to that because it would be painful to lose it. If it's painful to lose, draft state is a good candidate for addressing that pain. So some examples of where draft state is well applied. An email client. If you want to reply to an email message, you might actually find that some users will want to like leave that current context briefly to refer to something else and then come back to that composed reply. And you want to kind of leave their partially completed work there so that they can return to it. The body of GitHub comments, this is a lifesaver. Like there's some GitHub issues I've spent quite literally hours writing, and to the point where I started to write them in a separate text editor because I do not trust web applications to save me from myself. And in particular, I tend to get hosed by image drop zones, where like I expect to be able to drop something in the body of like in Gmail. There's one particular view of Gmail where like you can drop images in and it'll store them as attachments, and then there's another view where if you drop it in a compose field, you'll just navigate to that image and you'll kind of lose everything that was there. So anything that takes a lot of time, where you feel like regret if you lose your state, that is a good place to put draft state. You're already using draft state a little bit, although you might not know it. And this is for in-flight records. And what I mean by an in-flight record is if we imagine that we're all living as hummingbirds, and the whole rest of the world is taking a very long time, when we persist a comment, it's like going to take hours for that thing to finally come back from an API with an ID. And we might want to keep going about our business in our app and have a client-side representation of a comment on a post or some other record, and to be able to move on from that. So Ember data uses this idea of draft state so that we can have our representation of a record even while we're waiting for confirmation that the save has completed successfully. And so if you look at these, it will be something where Ember data will not want you to modify it because it hasn't heard back yet that the whole world has come in sync. It won't have an ID yet, but it will be in the store. And if you grab all of the items in the store and you like filter through by a non-ID property, you will see it there. But this is an example of sort of in-memory state that will soon be persisted, that is there for your convenience and to allow you to have a nice user experience. So ways to sniff out draft state. If it's something that eventually will go into some persisted medium, into local storage maybe, possibly draft state. If a high user effort is required, possibly draft state. And if you need to be able to survive transitions, that's a big one. Because in Ember, we store draft state on a service. So that means it's not associated with a particular component that is on the screen for a particular route. It's sort of stored at the application level. And so you can move wherever you need to within the app, and that state is going to be there whenever you come back. And then finally, the big thing, and this is the motivation for draft state, is if it's detrimental to the user experience when it goes away, this is probably what you're looking at. So I want to go into the mechanics of how this works, because it's quite interesting, and there's a new JavaScript primitive that's at the core of Ember's implementation of draft state. So our conceptual model here is we have a post, and this is for the app that we're working with right now. We have a post, and then we have comments on this post, right? And there is a has-many relationship here between posts and comments, right? A comment belongs to a post. And we want a solution that will work if we have a huge number of posts. So we need a solution that will work for huge tables of data where you have like 10,000 records and infinite scrolling, and it's so much data that you have to like use a virtualized scrolling because you just don't even want that much in the DOM. We need a data solution that will work well and that will not leak. And the important thing here is if we end up throwing the post away, we want to make sure that the comment is not dangling somewhere. Because this could be maybe an image upload or something that takes up a significant amount of memory. We just can't have stuff, sticking around longer than the record that they're related to. And the concept here that gives us the ability to do this is called a weak map. So I'm going to put the description of a weak map in the ECMA spec on the screen here, and we're going to go through it sentence by sentence so we know what makes it weak and what makes it a map. So a weak map is, we can see that we're already dealing with a key-value pair where an object is used as a key. So this is not just a JavaScript object where you have a typical string key and then an arbitrary value. This is really an object to something, usually an object-to-object map. And the thing that is necessary, the thing that makes it weak, is that if that connection between the key and the value only exists within the weak map, when we get rid of the key, the value should automatically be removed as well, and it should be free for garbage collection. And so the concept here is if we throw the post away, and the only way that we can get to this like draft state that is associated with a post is by using that post itself as a key, through the weak map. Once we get rid of the post, essentially that draft state will be an island of state that is not connected to anything else. It's not referred to in any closures anywhere. And that will make it so that it is eligible for garbage collection when JavaScript decides to do its thing. This is where the weakness comes from, the weak part of the weak map. It's the ability to get access to something without necessarily holding on to it and preventing it from being garbage collected. And so what this means is when we evict persistent records from memory, when we unload something from the Ember data store, for example, all of the draft state associated with that is eligible for garbage collection, just like that record we just removed from the store. The way you interact with the weak map is basically setting a value given a key. So here we're creating a new weak map, and then we're setting, we're using a post as a key and this draft comment as a value, and we're setting it there. So we don't necessarily have a real implementation of weak map in browsers today. So we use a polyfill, and there's a clever trick that the polyfill employs, which is to randomly generate a property name that is owned by the weak map. So this is going to literally call math.random and then do something to it. And it will actually store the value on the key itself. So it's going to be basically one big blob of data. And so when you throw one out, you kind of end up throwing the other out as well. So the weak map's role here in terms of the polyfill is just serving as a way of accessing that value given a key, because it's the only one that knows the secret property key that can be used to retrieve the value from the key, right? The solution for using weak maps and using this draft state in Ember apps is called Ember State Services. And there are two concepts here that you need to be aware of. One is the ability to create little chunks of state. This is the way you set up an initial value for this draft data. And the other is a computed property that helps you retrieve the correct piece of draft data given a key. So here's one approach, and you can feel free to use this in the exercise. The first thing you want to do is create a file in the states folder, and you can name that whatever you want, but it has to be in states. And you're just going to have that export an Ember object of some sort, right? So you're going to like export default ember.object.extend, and you can do whatever you want there. And then we're going to use the state for computed property macro anywhere we want to get a reference to this draft state. And that accepts two arguments here. The first is like the type of state we're working with. So post-info here is going to match the file name in that states folder. And then the second thing here, this model string, that is the property key on this object. So if you use the state for in the context of a component, model would be the property key that you'd be able to use to find the key for the weak map. And so here, in plain English, what we're trying to do with this computed property is we're going to say, if you look in the model property for this component, you're going to find a post. And in the weak map for post infos, I want to use the post you found at model as the key and give me back the post info object that you found. And because we use this as a computed property macro, if you had this in a component, as model is changed, this will kind of like, what do you call it? It will invalidate itself, and the next time you ask it for something, it will have the correct draft state. As model changes, the value returned by this post info computed property would also change. So here's the approach I want us to take in managing draft state within the app we're working on now. We have the post full component, and we're going to have essentially like a bucket of post info states that is created as needed, and they start out empty. And as we change which model we're looking at, right, and this is done just by navigating from post to post, this computed property macro is essentially the lower dotted line here, and that's going to make sure that we're looking at the correct draft state that is associated with that particular post, right?